She sent the text to the wrong number. A man who rules the city's shadows replied, "Don't move, I'm coming." May Brooks's fingers smeared a trail of crimson across the cracked glass of her phone. Her pulse was a frantic hammer in her throat, competing with the heavy thud of Marcus's shoulder hitting the bedroom door. The wood groaned, a dry, splintering sound that meant her time was up. "May, honey, stop playing games," Marcus's voice came through the cracks, eerily calm. "You know what happens when you make me chase you." This was the man who had promised her the world in a candlelit garden 3 years ago. The same man who, moments ago, had looked her in the eyes and kicked the door until it fractured her spirit along with the frame. She knew silence was her only shield, but the shield was breaking. Vision blurred by tears, May fumbled for her contacts. She needed her brother, Julian. He was her only lifeline. With one shaking thumb, she typed, "He's breaking down the door. He's going to kill me. 20453 Westfield, Unit 17. Please." She hit send and collapsed against the wall, listening to the lock click out of place. Buzz. A reply, but not from Julian. "Who is this, and why are you at that address?" May's heart stopped. The wrong number. She had sent her final plea to a ghost. Marcus was one hit away from breaching the room. "I'm sorry," she typed, her breath hitching. "Wrong number. Just please, if you can hear me, call for help. My husband is breaking in." 3 seconds of silence, then a reply that felt like a cold blade. "Stay behind the door. Lock the secondary latch. I'm closer than the police. 3 minutes." May didn't know this stranger. She didn't know if he was a savior or a different kind of monster. But as the door finally exploded inward and Marcus stepped through with a snarl, the world outside erupted. The screech of high-end tires, the heavy, synchronized thud of tactical boots. Marcus didn't even have time to reach her before the bedroom window shattered. A man in a tailored charcoal suit stepped through the glass as if he owned the air itself. A dragon tattoo wound its way up his neck, disappearing under a sharp jawline. He didn't look at Marcus. He looked only at May. "May Brooks," Han Dae-sung said, his voice a calm, terrifying velvet. "You called? I answered. Welcome to the edge of obsession. If you're here, you know we don't do happily ever after without a little blood on the roses. You just witnessed a collision that is going to rewrite the rules of power and devotion. If you're ready to see what happens when a Mafia king decides a broken woman is his greatest masterpiece, hit that like button, subscribe and ring the bell, because in Dae-sung's world, you never walk away. Now, let's see how May Brooks stopped being a victim and started becoming a legend. The wood of the bedroom door didn't just groan, it shrieked, a dry, splintering sound that vibrated through the small of May Brooks' back. She was pressed against the floor, her breath coming in ragged, shallow hitches that tasted like copper and cold panic. Her right arm was cradled against her ribs, a useless weight of white-hot agony where Marcus had twisted it until the bone gave way. Every time he threw his shoulder against the frame from the hallway, a fresh jolt of lightning shot through her, threatening to pull her into the gray fog of unconsciousness. "May, honey, don't be like this." Marcus's voice drifted through the cracks, eerily gentle, the practiced tone of a man who spent his days as a respected public servant and his nights as a monster. "You're hurt, you're confused. Just open the door so I can take care of you. You know I'm the only one who truly knows what you need." May's fingers, slick with sweat and the wet heat of blood from where a shard of wood had grazed her, fumbled with her phone. Her vision swam, the light from the cracked screen blinding in the darkened room. She didn't have time for a call. He'd hear her voice. She needed Julian. Her brother was the only person who knew the truth behind Marcus's polished smile. With a trembling left thumb, she pulled up her messages. The names blurred into dancing shapes. She tapped a recent contact, or what she thought was Julian, and typed with frantic, clumsy movements. 204535 Westfield, Unit 17, please. She hit send, the blue bubble hovering for an agonizing second before the status changed to delivered. She slumped against the wall, her head thudding against the plaster. Please, Julian, please be fast. Outside, the gentle persuasion stopped. Silence stretched for 5 beats, heavy and suffocating, before Marcus's voice dropped into that silky low register that always preceded the worst of the violence. I'm giving you 3 seconds, May, and you know how much I hate repeating myself. Buzz. The phone vibrated in her hand. May looked down, expecting a frantic reply from her brother. Instead, a string of unknown numbers stared back at her. Who is this, and why are you at that address? Ice doused her veins. A wrong number. She had sent her final prayer into the void to a stranger who was probably across the city, unaware of the blood on her floor. 1. Marcus growled. A heavy thud followed, and the top hinge of the bedroom door groaned as it began to tilt. Desperation took over. She didn't care who was on the other end. I'm sorry, she typed, tears splashing onto the glass. Wrong number, but please, husband broke my arm. He's breaking down the door. I need help. She watched the typing bubbles appear instantly. There was no hesitation, no questions. Stay behind the door. Lock the secondary latch if it's still holding. I'm closer than the police. 3 minutes. May stared at the screen, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. 3 minutes. Marcus was already at 2. 3. Marcus hissed. The door finally exploded inward, the frame shattering into 1,000 jagged teeth. As Marcus stepped into the bedroom, his eyes dark with a terrifying, righteous fury, May's phone buzzed one last time. I'm here. The 3 minutes felt like an eternity compressed into a single, suffocating heartbeat. Marcus stood in the center of the bedroom, the wreckage of the door scattered at his feet like shed skin. He didn't look like a man who had just committed an atrocity. He looked like a king reclaiming a rebellious subject. His eyes, usually so full of practiced charm, were dark pits of possessive fury as they landed on May's phone. Who were you talking to, May? You know I don't like it when you keep secrets. He took a step toward her, his hand reaching out, the same hand that had crushed her arm only moments ago. May pressed her back against the wall, her breath coming in jagged gasps, eyes fixed on the bedroom window. Exactly 180 seconds after the stranger's message, the night exploded. The bedroom window didn't just break, it vanished in a hail of glass and sudden blinding light. 2 figures in matte black tactical gear swung into the room on silent rappelling lines, hitting the floor with a synchronized thud that shook the apartment's foundation. Marcus spun around, reaching for the service weapon at his hip, his detective instincts finally kicking in, but he was too slow for the shadow that followed. A third figure stepped through the shattered window frame, moving with a terrifying, predator-like grace that made the air in the room turn to ice. He was dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that looked sharp enough to cut, his neck marked by the winding ink of a dragon tattoo. He didn't look at Marcus. He looked only at May, his obsidian eyes scanning her bruised face and the unnatural angle of her arm with a clinical, simmering intensity. "Who the hell are you?" Marcus roared, finally drawing his pistol. "I'm a police officer. Get out of my—" The man in the charcoal suit didn't flinch. In a blur of motion, he closed the distance between them. One hand caught Marcus's wrist, snapping it with a sound like dry kindling, a mirroring of the agony May had just endured. The gun clattered to the floor. Before Marcus could even scream, the man in the suit delivered a short, brutal strike to his temple, sending the detective crashing into the ruins of the bedroom door. The tactical team swarmed Marcus, pinning him to the floor with cold efficiency, but the man in the charcoal suit was already turning toward May. The violence he had just dispensed vanished from his expression, replaced by a terrifyingly focused calm. "May Brooks," he said, his voice a low, resonant velvet that seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards. "The 3 minutes are up." He knelt beside her, the sharp, expensive scent of black espresso and rain-drenched cedar surrounding her, cutting through the smell of fear. He didn't ask if she could walk. He reached out, his fingers surprisingly gentle as they slid beneath her knees and back, lifting her as if she were made of the finest porcelain. "Where are you taking me?" May whispered, her head falling against his shoulder as the adrenaline began to fade into exhaustion. "To a place where ghosts cannot follow," Han Dae-sung replied. He carried her out of the apartment, past the broken man on the floor, and into the waiting darkness of a black sedan. As the city lights blurred past the tinted windows, May realized the man holding her wasn't a savior sent from heaven. He was a king from the underworld, and she had just become his most precious acquisition. The transition from the chaos of the apartment to the silence of the estate was so absolute it felt like death. When May's eyes finally fluttered open, she didn't find the cracked plaster of her bedroom ceiling or the looming shadow of Marcus. Instead, she was greeted by an expanse of floor-to-ceiling glass that revealed a panoramic view of a city reduced to a carpet of twinkling, distant diamonds. She was high up, so high the clouds seemed to drift just past the balcony. She tried to sit up, but a sharp hiss escaped her lips as the movement tugged at her arm. It was no longer hanging at a gruesome angle. It was expertly set and encased in a lightweight, high-tech cast. The bed beneath her was vast, draped in silk sheets that felt like cool water against her skin. The room was a masterpiece of minimalist luxury: obsidian stone, brushed steel, and the soft glow of recessed lighting. "Don't push yourself. The sedative hasn't fully cleared your system." The voice came from the shadows near the window. Han Dae-sung was sitting in a leather armchair, a glass of dark liquid resting untouched on the table beside him. He had traded his suit jacket for a black silk shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing more of the intricate dragon scales that shimmered on his forearms. In the soft light, he looked less like a soldier and more like a deity carved from midnight. May pulled the silk duvet higher, her heart beginning its familiar, panicked thrum. "Where am I?" "My home," he said, standing up. His movements were fluid, devoid of any wasted energy. As he approached the bed, that signature scent of black espresso and rain-drenched cedar preceded him, anchoring May to the reality of the previous night. "You're in the mountains overlooking the city. No one enters these gates without my permission, especially not a detective with a broken wrist and a bruised ego." May looked at her bandaged arm, then back at him. "You rescued me, but you aren't the police. Why would a man like you answer a wrong number text from a stranger?" Dae-sung stopped at the edge of the bed. He didn't reach for her, but his presence was an overwhelming weight, a cold resolve that filled every corner of the room. He leaned down slightly, his obsidian eyes locking onto hers with a focus so intense it felt like he was reading the rhythm of her very soul. "I don't believe in accidents, May," he whispered. "You think you reached me by mistake. I think you finally reached the only person capable of keeping what is mine." "I'm not yours," she breathed, though the protest felt weak even to her own ears. "You are under my roof, wearing my silk and breathing my air," he countered, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "In my world, that makes you mine to protect, and I am very, very good at protecting my investments." He reached out then, his thumb grazing the edge of her jaw where a faint bruise remained. His skin was cool, his touch steady, a stark contrast to the volatile heat of Marcus's rage. There was no anger in Dae-sung, only a terrifying, immovable certainty. He wasn't a hero, and this wasn't a hospital. It was a fortress of glass, and she was the bird he had just caught and placed inside it. The heavy, pressurized silence of the estate became May's only companion over the next few days. Dae-sung was a ghost in his own fortress, appearing only in the quietest hours to check her vitals with a clinical, detached focus. By the fourth morning, the restlessness became a dull ache that rivaled the throb in her arm. She needed to know who her captor truly was. While the guards were occupied with a shift change, May slipped out of her room, her bare feet silent on the heated obsidian floors. She wandered through the minimalist corridors, feeling like a speck of dusk in a museum of shadows. At the end of a long, sunless gallery, she found a door that looked different from the others. Heavy, reinforced steel disguised with dark wood, equipped with a biometric scanner that had been left ajar. Curiosity, sharp and reckless, pushed her inside. The lights hummed to life as she crossed the threshold, and May's heart stopped. This wasn't an office or a vault. It was a cathedral of her own life. One wall was covered in high-resolution photographs, none of which she had ever seen. There was May at 21, laughing in a park she used to visit, May at her college graduation, May entering the courthouse on the day she married Marcus, looking radiant and tragically unaware. She moved deeper into the room, her breath hitching. Glass display cases lined the walls, containing items she thought she had lost years ago. Her favorite childhood ribbon, an original program from her first cello solo, signed in her own messy teenage hand. Most chilling of all was a digital screen scrolling through a live feed of Marcus's current location, a hospital bed under heavy guard, and Julian's apartment. You were never supposed to see this yet. May spun around, her back hitting a display case. Dae-sung stood in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the cold light of the hallway. He didn't look angry. He looked profoundly exposed, his usual mask of cold resolve flickering with something raw and ancient. "You've been following me," May whispered, her voice trembling as she gestured to the wall of her life. "For how long? This isn't protection. This is an obsession." Dae-sung walked toward her, his footsteps echoing like a countdown. He stopped inches away, the scent of espresso and rain-drenched cedar thick in the air. 5 years, May. I saw you perform at the conservatory. You played with a fire that Marcus spent every day trying to extinguish. I watched him dim your light, and I waited. You waited for him to break me? She spat, tears of betrayal stinging her eyes. I waited for you to realize you were in a cage so I could offer you a throne, he corrected, his voice dropping to a low, vibrating growl. He reached out, his hand hovering near a photo of her looking at the stars. I didn't just answer a wrong number, May. I've been holding that phone in my hand for 5 years, waiting for the moment you were finally desperate enough to reach for me. The realization hit her harder than Marcus's fist ever had. The text hadn't been an accident of fate. It had been the inevitable conclusion of a trap set long ago. She wasn't a guest or a victim. She was a masterpiece that had finally been delivered to its owner. Dae-sung wasn't her savior. He was the man who had let her burn just so he could be the one to collect the ashes. The revelation of the shrine left May feeling hollow. A ghost haunting a museum dedicated to her own tragedy. She spent the afternoon pacing the glass-walled living area, her skin crawling with the knowledge that Han Dae-sung had been the silent witness to every bruise and every tear for 5 years. She wanted to scream at him, to demand he let her go, but the estate was a tomb of silence. That silence shattered just after dusk. A muffled shout echoed from the lower levels, followed by the heavy, rhythmic thud of a struggle. Driven by a desperate need for answers, May followed the sound down a hidden staircase that led away from the luxury of the upper floors and into the cold, concrete bowels of the mountain. The air here was damp and smelled of ozone and wet earth. At the end of a long corridor, a door stood slightly ajar, spilling a harsh, fluorescent yellow light onto the floor. May pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering against her ribs as she peered through the gap. The room was stripped of all comfort. In the center, a man sat strapped to a steel chair, his face an unrecognizable mask of red. Standing over him was Dae-sung. He had removed his shirt, and the dragon tattoo on his back seemed to pulse with every movement of his muscles. Gone was the gentle protector who had tucked her into silk sheets. This man was a butcher. I will ask you one last time, Dae-sung said, his voice a flat, terrifying monotone. Who in the precinct gave Marcus the codes to my perimeter? The man in the chair spat blood on Dae-sung's polished shoes. You're a dead man, Han. The police'll crawl all over this mountain. Dae-sung didn't shout. He didn't show anger. He simply picked up a pair of heavy pliers from a tray of surgical tools. The police are merely a nuisance I pay to go away, but betrayal is an expense I cannot afford. What followed was a symphony of agony. May watched, paralyzed, as Dae-sung worked with a clinical, terrifying precision. He wasn't venting rage, he was extracting information as if he were peeling the layers of an orange. Every time the man in the chair screamed, Dae-sung leaned in closer, his expression as calm as if he were listening to a cello solo. May gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, and the sound echoed in the sterile room. Dae-sung froze. He didn't turn around immediately. He dropped the tool into a steel basin with a loud clang and reached for a white towel to wipe the crimson from his knuckles. When he finally turned, his obsidian eyes found May's through the crack in the door. There was no shame in his gaze, only a cold, hard truth. He walked toward the door and swung it open. The sharp, metallic scent of blood hit May like a physical blow, mingling with his aroma of espresso and rain-drenched cedar. This is the price of your safety, May, he said, looming over her, his chest still heaving slightly from the exertion. You asked why I came for you. I came because I am the only monster big enough to keep the other monsters away. He reached out, his blood-stained thumb tracing the line of her jaw. May flinched, but he didn't pull away. You can hate me for what I am, but never forget that the man in that chair was the one helping Marcus find your brother. Now go back upstairs. Your dinner is being served. As she fled back toward the light, May realized the terrifying reality of her new life. Marcus had broken her body, but Han Dae-sung was after her soul. The days that followed the basement interrogation were a blur of sterile luxury and a silence that felt heavy with unspoken choices. May remained in the upper wings of the estate, the memory of the blood on Dae-sung's knuckles a permanent stain on her mind. Yet, as the physical wounds began to knit together, the paralyzing fog of Marcus's influence started to lift. For the first time in 3 years, there was no one shouting at her, no one counting to 3, and no one demanding she be smaller than she was. She spent hours in the glass-walled solarium, watching the storm clouds roll over the distant peaks. Her arm was healing with supernatural speed under the care of the private doctors Dae-sung provided, but her voice remained locked behind a wall of trauma. She had been silent for so long to survive that she had forgotten how to speak for herself. Dae-sung appeared every evening at dusk. He didn't ask her to talk. He didn't demand her gratitude. He would simply sit in the armchair across from her, reading through dossiers or watching the horizon, his presence a constant grounding weight. He was a predator, yes, but he was a predictable one. He never moved toward her without warning. He never raised his voice. You're thinking about the basement, he said one evening, not looking up from his tablet. The scent of black espresso and rain-drenched cedar drifted toward her, more potent than usual in the cool mountain air. May flinched slightly, her fingers curling into the silk of her robe. I'm thinking about the man in the chair, she whispered, her voice raspy from disuse. Did he have a family? Dae-sung finally looked at her, his obsidian eyes reflecting the fading light of the sun. He had a price, and he chose to sell Julian's location to Marcus. In my world, that forfeits his right to a family. He stood and walked to the window, his silhouette sharp against the darkening sky. Marcus is still out there, May. He is using every corrupt tie he has to find a way onto this mountain. He doesn't want you back because he loves you. He wants you back because you are the only thing he hasn't been able to break. May stood up, her legs trembling but holding. And what do you want, Dae-sung? You've watched me for 5 years. You've built a room filled with my ghost. Am I just a more expensive prize to you?" Daesung turned, and for the first time, the cold resolve in his gaze shifted into something hotter, something more dangerous. He crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides, stopping so close she could feel the heat radiating from his chest. He didn't touch her, but the air between them thickened until it was hard to breathe. "You're the woman who played the cello until the strings bled," he growled, his voice a low, vibrating chord. "I want the woman who had enough fire to text a stranger when death was at her door. I don't want a masterpiece to hang on a wall, May. I want a queen who can stand beside me while I burn this city to the ground." He reached out, his hand hovering near her throat, waiting. This time, May didn't flinch. She leaned forward just a fraction of an inch, meeting his gaze with a spark of the fire he claimed to seek. "Then teach me," she whispered, her voice finally finding its edge. "Teach me how to be as ruthless as you are." The fragile peace of the estate shattered on a Tuesday morning, not with a bang, but with a vibration. May was in the solarium, her fingers tentatively ghosting over the strings of a new cello Daesung had placed there, when her phone, the same one with the cracked screen she refused to discard, shivered against the marble side cable. She picked it up, expecting a message from the doctors or perhaps another cryptic directive from Daesung. Instead, the screen displayed a grainy, high-resolution photo that turned her blood to slush. It was Julian. Her brother was slumped in a metal chair, his face bruised and a thick roll of silver duct tape sealing his mouth. Behind him, the background was a blur of damp concrete and industrial shelving, a stark contrast to the glass and silk sanctuary she had been hiding in. A second later, a text followed. "The dragon can't hide you forever, May. You belong at home with your husband. You have 6 hours to walk out of those gates and meet me at the old pier. If I see a single one of his suits, Julian goes into the harbor in a concrete suit. Come back to your rightful place, baby. Don't make me ask again." The phone slipped from her hand, clattering onto the floor. The 3 Marcus had counted at her bedroom door was happening all over again, but this time he wasn't holding her arm, he was holding her soul. "May." Daesung was standing at the entrance of the solarium. He didn't need to see the screen to know what had happened. The rigid line of his jaw and the way his men were already moving in the hallway told her that his intelligence network was already screaming. He walked toward her, the scent of espresso and rain-drenched cedar cutting through her mounting hysteria. "He has him," May choked out, her voice a thin, fragile thread. "He has Julian. He wants me to come back. He says I belong to him." Daesung reached her in 2 strides, his hands catching her shoulders to steady her. His grip was firm, a cold anchor in the storm of her panic. "You belong to no one but yourself," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "He is using the only play he has left because he knows he cannot touch you as long as you are with me." "I have to go," she cried, trying to pull away. "He'll kill him, Daesung. You saw what Marcus does when he's angry. I can't let Julian pay for my escape." Daesung's obsidian eyes narrowed, a flash of something lethal flickering in their depths. He didn't let go. Instead, he pulled her closer until she was forced to look at the cold, immovable resolve in his face. "If you walk into that trap, he kills you both," Daesung said, his words sharp as glass. "Marcus doesn't want a wife, he wants a trophy he can break to prove he still has power. You are not going back to that rightful place. You are going to help me destroy it." He let go of her shoulders and reached into his jacket, pulling out a small encrypted device. He laid it on the cello's bridge. "We have 5 hours and 40 minutes. You told me to teach me how to be ruthless, May. This is your first lesson. We don't negotiate with monsters. We hunt them." May looked at the photo of her brother, then at the man who had stalked her for 5 years just to claim her. She was caught between two predators, but as she reached for the device, she realized she was finally done being the prey. The war room was a cavern of cold blue light and digital maps, a sharp departure from the silk-draped luxury of the upper floors. Screens flickered with thermal feeds of the old pier, tracing the heat signatures of Marcus's men. Dae-sung stood at the center of it all, a dark silhouette against the glowing monitors. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket. His black shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, the dragon on his neck appearing to breathe as he studied the tactical layouts. When May entered, the room went silent. The men in tactical gear, the same ones who had breached her bedroom, stepped back, acknowledging her presence with a synchronized nod that felt like an induction. Dae-sung turned. He didn't offer comfort. He didn't tell her everything would be okay. Instead, he cleared a space on the steel table. Resting there was a sleek, matte black handgun and a small, jagged blade with a hilt wrapped in dark leather. "The extraction team is ready," Dae-sung said, his voice a low, steady vibration that filled the room. "I can have my men storm that pier, retrieve Julian, and bring you Marcus's head in a box. You can stay here, behind the glass, and wait for the world to be clean again. That is the first choice. You remain the protected, and I remain the protector." May looked at the weapons, then at the man whose scent, espresso and rain-drenched cedar, had become her only sense of home. "And the second choice?" Dae-sung walked toward her, his eyes like polished flint. He stopped close enough for her to feel the lethal energy radiating from him. "The second choice is that you come with me. You don't hide in the shadows anymore. You look Marcus in the eye and show him that the woman he broke is dead. You take the weapon, you cross the line, and you reclaim your life with your own hands." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly intimate whisper. "But understand this, May. Once you take that weapon, there is no going back to the woman you were. You won't just be a victim who escaped. You will be part of my world. You will be the dragon's queen. The city will fear you as much as they fear me." The air in the room seemed to thin. May looked at her right arm. The cast was gone, replaced by a subtle brace, but she could still feel the ghost of the pain from the night the door broke. She thought of Julian, terrified and bound, and she thought of Marcus's calm, counting voice. She realized then, but safety was just another kind of cage. As long as someone else was fighting her battles, she was still small. She was still waiting for a count of 3. Without a word, May stepped forward. Her hand didn't tremble as she reached past the blade and gripped the cold, heavy steel of the handgun. The weight of it was grounding, a solid anchor against the years of floating in fear. Dae-sung's expression didn't change, but a predatory glint of pride sparked in his obsidian eyes. He reached out, his hand covering hers on the weapon, his thumb tracing the line of her knuckles. "Good," he hissed, the word a dark benediction. "Now let's go show him what happens when you touch something that belongs to the shadows." The rain over the old pier was a relentless, icy deluge that blurred the line between the sky and the black harbor water. Below the rusted girders of Warehouse 12, Marcus stood beneath a single flickering spotlight, checking his watch with the arrogant impatience of a man who still believed he held the leash. Julian was slumped in the metal chair beside him, shivering and pale, a silent pawn in a game Marcus thought he had already won. 10 minutes, Julian," Marcus shouted over the wind. "She'll come. She always comes when I call. She's weak like that." But the woman who stepped out of the swirling mist was not the woman Marcus remembered. May moved with a lethal, rhythmic grace, flanked by 2 columns of shadows that moved with the synchronized precision of a Roman legion. She wore a long, dark coat that caught the wind like a shroud, her hair slicked back, revealing the sharp, cold clarity of her features. Beside her, Han Dae-sung walked a half-step behind, his presence a silent, terrifying promise of violence. The scent of black espresso and rain-drenched cedar seemed to push back the salt and rot of the pier. Marcus pulled his service weapon, his laugh high and jagged. I told you to come alone, May. Tell the suits to back off or your brother dies. May didn't stop walking. She didn't flinch. She didn't even look at the gun. She kept her gaze fixed on Marcus's eyes, her expression a mirror of Dae-sung's immovable resolve. You're still counting, Marcus, May said, her voice cutting through the storm, steady and devoid of the tremors that had defined her for years. You're counting in a world that doesn't belong to you anymore. I am the law, Marcus screamed, his finger tightening on the trigger as the tactical teams surrounded the perimeter, their red laser sights dancing across his chest like a swarm of angry hornets. Get over here now, or I swear— You're a small man in a very large shadow, May interrupted, stopping 10 feet away. She didn't look back at Dae-sung for permission. She reached into her coat and drew the matte black handgun with a motion so fluid it looked rehearsed. She held it steady, her grip firm, the weapon an extension of her own reclaimed will. The law didn't stop you from breaking my arm. It didn't stop you from hurting my brother. But the dragon did. Dae-sung stepped forward, his obsidian eyes fixed on Marcus with the detached boredom of a god watching an insect. She gave you a choice to run, detective. I would have killed you the moment I saw you. She was the one who insisted on looking at the man she once feared, just to see how small he truly is. Marcus looked from the laser dots on his chest to the cold, beautiful woman holding him at gunpoint. For the first time, the predator felt the teeth of the trap. He saw the way May stood, not as a victim being rescued, but as a queen taking back her territory. She belonged to the shadows now, wrapped in the dark authority of the man beside her. Let him go, May commanded, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register that made Marcus's hand tremble. Or don't. I've stopped caring which choice you make. In that moment, as Marcus realized he was no longer the one counting to 3, the power shifted forever. May Brooks wasn't just a survivor. She was the legend the city would whisper about for years to come. The silence of the mountain estate was different now. It was no longer the heavy, suffocating quiet of a cage, but the deep, resonant stillness of a throne room. 3 months had passed since the night at the pier. Marcus hadn't disappeared. That would have been too merciful. Instead, stripped of his badge and his dignity, he was serving a life sentence in a facility where the guards were all on Dae-sung's payroll, a slow, living rot that ensured he would never forget the woman who had ended him. Julian was safe, recovering in a coastal villa under a protection detail that answered only to May. May stood on the balcony of the solarium, the city lights below looking like a fallen galaxy. She reached for her cello, her right arm moving with a strength that felt new, almost tempered. As she drew the bow across the strings, the music that emerged wasn't the fragile, pleading melody of her past. It was dark, rich, and commanding, a song of power. The glass door slid open behind her. She didn't have to turn to know it was him. The sharp, expensive scent of black espresso and rain-drenched cedar filled the air, anchoring her. Han Dae-sung walked to the railing, his silhouette sharp against the moonlight. He had discarded his tie, the dragon tattoo on his neck visible as he watched her play. He waited for the final haunting note to fade into the mountain air before he spoke. "The city is quiet tonight," he said, his voice a low, velvety vibration. "They've heard the music. They know who rules the heights now." May set the cello aside and turned to him. There was no fear in her eyes, only a reflection of his own immovable resolve. She walked toward him, the silk of her dark gown whispering against the obsidian floor. She stopped inches from him, looking up into those obsidian eyes that had watched her from the shadows for 5 years. "They should be quiet," she whispered, her voice steady and edged with a cold authority. "I'm done being the girl who screams." Han Dae-sung reached out, his hand sliding behind her neck, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw with a possessive, grounding heat. He pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers. "You were never just a girl to me, May. You were a spark I knew would eventually set the world on fire." "And now?" she asked, her hand coming up to rest on his chest, feeling the steady, lethal thrum of his heart. "Now," he hissed, a predatory smile touching his lips, "we burn it together." He leaned down, his lips brushing hers in a kiss that tasted of obsidian and old promises. May didn't pull away. She leaned into the darkness, embracing the man and the empire he offered. Behind them, the glass fortress stood tall, a monument to a woman who had sent a text to the wrong number and found her way to the only place she truly belonged. The victim was gone. The legend had only just begun.
If you're still here, you've just seen what happens when the wrong number leads to the right kind of chaos. May Brooks reached out for a lifeline and found a legend instead. She traded a life of fear for a seat at the table of the man who rules the city's shadows. This is more than a rescue. It's a rebirth. It's what happens when the woman you tried to break is finally claimed by the only man dangerous enough to protect her. If Han Dae-sung's lethal focus and that signature scent of espresso and rain-drenched cedar hooked you from the first text, hit that like button. Subscribe to AfroKorean Black Crown right now. We don't deal in fairy tales here. We deal in power, obsession, and the kind of devotion that leaves a mark. Drop a comment below. If you were May, would you have picked up that weapon and stepped into Dae-sung's world? And let me know which ruthless king you want to see take the stage next. Because in this world, the prey doesn't just escape, she becomes the one to fear. Welcome to the throne room. Stay sharp because the next story is already lurking in the dark.